September 1901. A nation in shock watches as the funeral procession of President William McKinley goes by, and a new, unpredictable character takes charge of the American experiment. Stepping out of the shadow of the Gilded Age and into the Progressive Era is a man who doesn't just hold the office, he reshapes it. Republican Theodore Roosevelt inherited a country with a public that demanded reforms, government accountability, and a stronger federal action. Being himself a war hero, specifically part of the Rough Riders, he was decisive, egotistical, and brutally honest. He is sometimes referred to as a progressive president because of the acts he helped pass that improved workers' conditions in factories, increased government regulation of businesses, increased government involvement in international affairs, and completely changed the future of American foreign policy from that of isolationism and non-intervention to that of intervention for prevention. Between 1901 and 1909, Roosevelt enlarged the power and prestige of the presidency by acting as an activist decision-maker who used executive authority, public persuasion, and an assertive foreign policy to reshape national priorities. Roosevelt redefined American reach by treating the military as an extension of his personal will. First of all, the Panama Canal. When negotiations with Colombia stalled, Roosevelt didn't wait. He threw his weight, or what was known as the Big Stick diplomacy, behind the Panamanian Revolution, instantly recognizing the new nation and securing the Canal Zone. It was the ultimate Big Stick move. Second, the Roosevelt Corollary. In Santo Domingo, in the Dominican Republic, he moved beyond defense. He asserted that the United States had the right to exercise an international police power. He occupied customs houses to ensure that European debts were paid, and he kept foreign warships out of American waters, thus following, to an extent, the Monroe Doctrine. Second, Roosevelt used executive order to reshape America. He bypassed a reluctant Congress to enact his Square Deal, a domestic program built on the 3 C's to make everything square and fair again. First, control of corporations. He directed the Justice Department to launch 44 antitrust suits, famously breaking the railroad and oil monopolies. Second, consumer protection. Following the outcry over The Jungle, written by Upton Sinclair in 1906, he used his authority to push through the Pure Food and Drug Act on that same year. Third, conservation. This was his true passion. By executive order, he bypassed timber companies' interests to create 150 national forests and 5 national parks, protecting roughly 230 million acres of land. And, while not a formal cabinet member, his close partnership with naturalist John Muir influenced his administration, turning conservation from a hobby into a national priority. Third, the veto and legislative leverage. Roosevelt viewed the veto as a strategic shield for his progressive vision. First, the conservation veto. When Congress passed S. 4363, granting a private railroad right-of-way through the San Francisco Mountains Forest Reserve, Roosevelt struck it down. He refused to let private profit dismantle the public's natural heritage. And second, legislative influence. He was the first president to realize that public persuasion could force Congress's hand. He leaked stories to the press and gave speeches across the country, using the American people as a hammer to drive his legislative nails. Fourth, appointments, building a legacy. Roosevelt surrounded himself with men who shared his restless spirit, the first of whom was the administrator. He appointed William Howard Taft as the Governor General of the Philippines, creating a successor who could manage the administrative complexities of an emerging international power. Second, the Hepburn Act gave the government power to set freight rates. The Bureau of Corporations took action against unscrupulous monopolies. The Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act created a new era of consumers' protection, specifically focusing on the square deal. Third, he encouraged policies that would form the core of the future federal government: pensions, unemployment insurance, a graduated income tax, child labor laws, and women's suffrage. Fourth, Roosevelt mediated peace between Russia and Japan in 1906, establishing the Asian continent, increasing America's international prestige, and winning the Nobel Prize. He stopped a Franco-German conflict over Morocco, possibly delaying the onset of World War I by a decade. Theodore Roosevelt didn't just govern, he built. He carved the path between the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans and dismantled the corporate giants of the Gilded Age. His decisions were guided by a singular belief: the United States was destined for greatness, but only if its president was bold enough to seize it. He said, "Speak softly and carry a big stick. You will go far." In the early 1900s, the world's navies had to sail thousands of miles around the tip of South America to move between the Atlantic and Pacific. However, Roosevelt saw this as a strategic failure. When Colombia balked at U.S. terms for a canal, Roosevelt bypassed the diplomats. He threw the U.S. naval support behind Panamanian rebels, secured their independence, recognized the nation, and negotiated the Hay-Bunau-Varilla Treaty. This gave the United States permanent control over a 10-mile wide canal zone. To justify such interventions, he appended a corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. He declared that in cases of wrongdoing in Latin America, the United States would act as an international police power. The Panama Canal was more than an engineering marvel. It was the ultimate projection of American global power. It proved that the president could now rewrite the map of the world. While Roosevelt looked abroad with a big stick, he looked at domestic corporate power with a magnifying glass. He believed that no corporation was bigger than the American people. Roosevelt shocked the financial world by using the Justice Department to sue the Northern Securities Company, a massive railroad trust. He didn't want to destroy all big businesses, only the bad trusts that hurt the American people. He believed in good and bad trusts. These aggressive regulatory decisions were soon written in the Meat Inspection Act and the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906, forever changing the relationship between the government and foodstuff. His most enduring legacy was his fight for the conservation of the American spirit through nature. He established the United States Forest Service and signed the Antiquities Act, protecting millions of acres from commercial exploitation. He created 150 national forests and 5 national parks. He changed how the American public viewed the president. They now viewed him as a keeper that acted in their best interests. Despite Roosevelt's popularity, his style created a heated constitutional debate that still continues today. Henry Adams, an American historian and a descendant of both John Adams and John Quincy Adams, previous presidents, said that power, when wielded by abnormal energy, is the most serious of facts. Roosevelt, more than any other living within the range of notoriety, showed the singular primitive quality that belongs to ultimate matter. He was pure act. This quote by Henry Adams describes Theodore Roosevelt as a force of constant action, suggesting his defining characteristic was an unstoppable, instinctual reaction to act immediately upon his environment, rather than just contemplating or reacting, or even acting passively or in a calm manner. Roosevelt tackled any challenge without fear or hesitation. At the heart of Roosevelt's presidency was a radical reimagining of the office known as the stewardship theory. Generally, presidents believed that they could only do what the Constitution or Congress explicitly authorized. However, Roosevelt absolutely changed this logic. He argued that the president was a steward of the people, and he had the legal right and moral duty to do anything the nation required unless it was expressly forbidden by the Constitution of law, drawing power from the elasticity clause in the Constitution. This belief created a massive conflict with Congress. Leaders accused him of executive overreach, and some even of tyranny, fearing that he was transforming the presidency into an oligarchy. When Roosevelt used executive orders to bypass Congress to create national monuments or to intervene in the 1902 coal strike, he was accused of absolutely overreaching into the power of the purse and the legislative role of the Senate. This debate over the stewardship theory completely changed the American presidency as an institution because it moved the main area of power in Washington, D.C., from the Capitol to the White House. Roosevelt proved that a determined executive and a determined president could actually set the national agenda, therefore forcing Congress to react to him and to public pressure rather than the other way around. By expanding the definition of inherent executive authority and the stewardship theory, Roosevelt created the foundation for the 20th century imperial presidency, where actions such as the Bay of Pigs invasion and the Operation Condor in Latin America and the Vietnam War and the Korean War, his actions created the framework by which future leaders use executive orders and broad interpretations of power to manage national crisis and environmental protection without waiting for a slow-moving Congress. Roosevelt left the White House in 1909, but he left behind an office that was faster, stronger, and far more controversial than the one he inherited from William McKinley after his assassination. He increased its prestige. He turned the presidency into the primary engine of the American government by centralizing power. When Theodore Roosevelt stepped down, the United States had emerged as a major international world power. The economy, although somewhat broken by the panic of 1907, was increasingly regulated and shielded from the worst abuses of the Gilded Age. He was the first president to understand that the government must be the master of the corporations and that the president must be the master of the government. As he said in an annual message transmitted to Congress on December 5, 1905, until the national government obtains, in some manner which the wisdom of the Congress may suggest, proper control over the big corporations engaged in interstate commerce, that is, over the great majority of big corporations, it will be impossible to deal adequately with these evils. The common American worker found a voice and a steward in the government, and the American wilderness found a permanent protector. George Washington's ideals written in his farewell address in 1796 of isolationism were dead. The big stick placed America at the center of the world stage. Roosevelt's most profound legacy was the permanent expansion of presidential power and its increase in prestige. He proved that the president, not Congress, should be the one to set the legislative agenda. However, to avoid abuses, he established the precedent that the president has inherent powers and a moral duty to act in the public interest, a doctrine that every activist president since has utilized.
Political bodies exist to secure responsible government and to execute the will of the people. From these great tasks, both of the old bodies have turned aside. Instead of instruments to promote the general welfare, they have become the tools of corrupt interests which use them impartially to serve their selfish purposes. Behind the ostensible government sits enthroned an invisible government, owing no allegiance and acknowledging no responsibility to the people. To destroy this invisible government, to dissolve the unholy alliance between corrupt business and corrupt politics, is the first task of the statesmanship of the day.
Wake from your sleep, the drying of your tears. Today we escape, we escape. Pack and get dressed before your father hears us, before all hell breaks loose. Breathe, keep breathing.